Hey everybody, I'm back in front of my bookshelves today because I want to talk to you about a series of books that I've been reading this fall by John Scalzi called the Old Man's War series. I got these all from the library. It starts with Old Man's War, the title book, and then goes to The Ghost Brigades, The Last Colony, Zoe's Tale, The Human Division, and The End of All Things. And I guess I got most of these from the library because actually I bought The Human Division at NerdCon thinking that I was going to try and get in a line and get John Scalzi to sign it. But then I thought better of it because I realized, as I almost always do in these circumstances, that I don't really want someone's scribble on a page, but that what I really want is to have a beer with him and sit down and pick his brain and get to know him as a human being. And I just knew that wasn't going to be a possibility with thousands of other fans thronging and also wanting to somehow insert themselves into Scalzi's consciousness for a brief period of time. So anyway, since that didn't happen, I own The Human Division, but don't have it signed, and the rest of these I have to return back to the library here pretty soon. I really enjoyed these books. They're a lot of fun to read. There's some stellar writing in them, some great characters, some funny moments, some intense action, some big sci-fi ideas. About the only one of them that I didn't think was excellent was Zoe's Tale, and that's mainly because it's a rehashing of a lot of the plot points from The Last Colony, but from a different character's perspective. Sometimes that's interesting to read. I didn't think so in this case, but your mileage may vary. And the last two books in the series, The Human Division and The End of All Things, are interesting because they break the typical novel format. The Human Division was actually originally delivered as a series of ebooks. I think there's 12 or 13 together that do tell a single coherent story, but also stand alone by themselves as individual little stories. And The End of All Things was 4 separate novellas that were also delivered as individual parts and can stand alone, but collectively tell a bigger story together. That's cool to see Scalzi and other authors experimenting with form. One of the coolest things about the digital revolution is that we're seeing some of these things which were popular a century or more ago revived in the new format because suddenly they're vital again. It used to be common for authors to deliver their stories, their novels, in serial format published in newspapers or magazines or, in other formats, in pamphlets, before they were compiled together into a whole novel. And that went out of fashion for a long time, but it appears that maybe that might be coming back in, and that can be a cool thing. As for the plot and concept behind the Old Man's War series, it begins with the character John Perry, who on his 75th birthday enlists in the Colonial Union Army and is taken off of Earth to join up in this high-tech military force that goes across the galaxy engaging in a war which the people on Earth have been largely kept ignorant of, this battle with all of these other species. Because it turns out in this fictional universe that our galaxy is filled with dozens, maybe even hundreds of sentient spacefaring species which share similar needs in order to be able to inhabit certain planets, and therefore competition for those planets is intense, and there's near total warfare between all of these species battling in order to stake a claim to a certain amount of territory in the galaxy. So because humanity is competing with all these other species in order to colonize habitable planets around the galaxy, it deals with a lot of themes having to do with settler colonialism, and I kept holding out hope that this series was going to become a true post-colonial critique of our society through a science fiction lens, and that's what really pulled me on into reading the series and why I wanted to talk to you about it today. That said, these books are not idea books. There's not like a thin veneer of story pasted over the ideology underneath. The ideology in the books isn't even really clear. It never quite gets to a post-colonial position. There's certainly some criticism of settler colonialism in the books. One of the characters even calls the Colonial Union, a fascistic shit show at one point. But honestly, these stories strike me much more as someone who grew up loving stories about space marines and guys and soldiers with blasters in space, and then also grew up and recognized the problematic elements of the fetishization and glorification of military culture and colonialization represented in that kind of science fiction, and decided that if they were going to write science fiction like that, they would have to at least make some nods to the idea that, any kind of powerful government or species that would act this way would be morally problematic, to say the least. Even though these books do peel back the veil a little bit on colonialism and the problems with colonialism and show how the colonial union is kind of a doomed project from the outset, they nevertheless give us a lot of heroes who are within that system, who are part of that system, and are trying to make a sort of uneasy peace with it at the same time as they're criticizing it or maybe undermining it from within. The books never really give us a true hero who is from the underclasses, a member of the oppressed, or show us a perspective of the colonized rather than the colonizers. It always remains firmly from the position of the colonizers going out and how they grapple with the problematic elements of the society they live in and how they're acting. But that might not be a terrible thing, actually. A series of books designed to show the perspective of the victims of colonization might actually have less impact on the people who most need to read stories like this. The fact that these books are sort of wearing the skin of Space Marine adventure stories shooting aliens across the galaxy might actually help them appeal to people who have never heard of post-colonialism and who don't see the problematic elements in that kind of storytelling. And so this might begin to open them up to new challenges and possibilities in thinking, which actually reflect their situation better. Many of us actually are similar to these characters in that we are participants in a settler colonial society, not the victims of, but the beneficiaries of a settler colonial society. And by we, I mean white descendants of European immigrants to the Americas, Australia, Canada, places like that. I actually have a lot in common with John Perry, the main character of a couple of these books, and that he is an intellectually very progressive guy who nevertheless is deeply, deeply compromised by his willing participation in a military apparatus that benefits him and, harms a whole lot of other people, and he slowly becomes more and more aware of the ramifications of his participation in that and starts to make different choices. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but the fact of the matter is that he isn't a post-colonialist. He is a white settler, colonialist, progressive dude bro. He is John Scalzi or Chris Cluey or Will Wheaton or myself, the kinds of people who get called social justice warriors and who need to be reminded of, our participation in and complicity in structures of oppression. So that puts me in a really strange position as I come to the end of this video in terms of recommending this series, because if you're the kind of person who's really going to enjoy a, Space Marine, sci-fi, rock'em sock'em adventure, then you'll probably really enjoy these books, but after you've just heard me rant about post-colonialism for 5 minutes, you might be a little bit turned off. And if you're the kind of person who's really looking for some deep and insightful criticism of settler colonialism, you might find this series disappointing in that it never quite gets there. It remains at its heart a kind of pulpy, explosion-filled adventure series. So I guess if you're looking for something in between those two things, a series of books that's fun and tense and exciting and dramatic and got lots of great characters and humorous moments in them, but also playfully kind of flirts around the edges of some deep political criticism, then this series is the series you want to pick up. The Old Man's War by John Scalzi, not an intro to post-colonialism in novel form, but almost.